It was a late autumn afternoon in the quiet town of Ellison Ridge, where the wind carried fallen leaves down empty sidewalks and locals gathered at a sleek new bar called the Meridian. The place, once a humble tavern known as Mulligan's Watch, had recently been renovated into a trendy lounge with leather booths, soft jazz, and Edison bulbs glowing like relics of a warmth it no longer possessed. That day, an elderly figure stepped across its polished threshold, stooped, deliberate, in a well-pressed coat with a faded Marine Corps pin glinting on the lapel. His name was Elias Calder, age 89, a former Force Recon Marine whose eyes scanned the space once filled with the laughter of comrades and the scrape of boots on wood. Behind the counter stood Damien Voss, the new proprietor, ambitious, impatient, and image-conscious, with a tight vest and tighter smile. Spotting Red among the crowd of flannel shirts and cuffed jeans, Damien strode over briskly, voice low and strained. "Not here," he said. "This place isn't a museum." Red met his stare with the stillness of someone who'd waited out mortars. He said nothing, only nodded faintly and turned away, walking back through the door into the chill, his steps muffled by the drifting leaves. Most customers returned to their drinks. A few watched in awkward silence. One woman lowered her phone, recording unintentionally. None spoke. The door shut quietly behind him, and the jazz resumed, indifferent. Outside, Red paused beneath the rusted Mulligan's Watch sign, half covered by a modern logo that hadn't yet faded the old one entirely. The street was empty. The wind picked up. And still he stood for a moment longer, straightened his coat, and walked on. Before he was Red Calder, he was Elias from Flathead County, Montana, just a wiry boy with calloused hands and a chipped front tooth from falling off a horse. His father was a sawmill man with a quick temper, his mother a schoolteacher with tired eyes. Life was quiet, harsh, and predictable. That changed the day Elias lied about his age and enlisted at 17. It was 1953. Korea was cooling down, but the Cold War was tightening its grip. He signed his name, shaved his head, and never looked back. Boot camp at Camp Pendleton broke most boys. It carved Elias into something else. He didn't talk much, but he listened. He learned quickly, shot straighter than most, and volunteered for everything that came with fewer rules. Within 2 years, he was Force Recon, specialized, silent, and sent to places the government denied knowing. He became Red after surviving a parachute malfunction in East Africa that turned half his scalp into scar tissue. The nickname stuck. He didn't mind. It made people forget his real name, which made things easier. By the time he was 25, Red had operated in Burma, Algeria, and the Arctic. He saw the worst in men and buried some of it in the jungle. He lost friends in ways that still woke him at night, half-heard screams through static, the thud of a grenade too close, the way blood smells in humid air. But the mission always came first. Even in Laos, when the operation wasn't sanctioned and the maps didn't exist, Red carried on. It was there he lost most of his hearing, an ambush, a blast, a scream he didn't hear until it was inside his skull forever. In 1983, he and his younger brother Jimmy were both in country during the Beirut barracks bombing. Jimmy didn't make it. Red flew home alone and carried the casket up the church steps himself. He didn't speak at the funeral. He didn't speak much after that at all. He met Marie 2 years later at a VFW dance in San Diego. She was a nurse with strong hands and a sharper tongue. They married within 6 months. She softened him. She read to him when his ears rang too loud. She made him laugh, which always surprised him. For the first time, Red thought maybe he could live in the world he'd spent decades defending. They bought a little house near the base. He built a workbench in the garage and started carving wood with the same precision he once used to field strip rifles. They had no children, but the silence between them was rarely empty. In '92, Marie got sick. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast and didn't care who she was. Red stayed at her bedside every night. When she finally passed, he folded her hospital blanket with military corners and carried it home like a flag. After the funeral, he left California without a word and drove east until the mountains felt familiar. He ended up in Ellison Ridge, a town with 2 traffic lights and a quiet dignity. He bought a small cottage on the edge of town, near the woods, and started each morning with black coffee and a walk. People called him Sir out of habit, then forgot he was there. But Red never really retired. He volunteered twice a week at the local VA clinic. He repaired rifles for free. He taught marksmanship to ROTC kids on weekends. He visited the graves of veterans who had no visitors. And once a month, without fail, he returned to Mulligan's Watch. The place had always welcomed servicemen, its walls filled with old photos, unit patches, and yellowed notes pinned behind glass. His own picture hung above the bar, young, firm-jawed, the Marine Corps blues crisp on his shoulders. He never made a fuss. He'd order a single whiskey, neat, and sip it slowly. The bartender, a man named Neil who'd served in Vietnam, always shook his hand before and after. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Sometimes they told the same old story about the time Red supposedly scared off 2 bikers with just a stare. Neil swore it was true. Red never confirmed it. Then Neil died in 2022, and things changed. Damien Voss bought the place with money from his tech startup and an idea for rebranding. He gutted the wood paneling, installed slate and chrome, hired mixologists instead of bartenders, and removed the veterans wall completely. "History's not profitable," he told a reporter once. "It's time for Ellison Ridge to grow up." Red didn't protest. He showed up as usual, sat in the same corner booth, and ordered 1 drink. The new staff didn't recognize him. Sometimes they asked for ID. He never argued. He paid, tipped, and left. But the absence of that wall lingered. It wasn't just about him. It was about Jimmy, and Neil, and the others who had laughed there, limped there, saluted there. The place had held memories the way old boots hold sweat and sand, unspoken but sacred. That's why, when Damien confronted him in front of strangers and said, "This place isn't a museum," Red didn't reply. What could he say that wouldn't betray everything he'd learned? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply left, coat buttoned, shoulders straight, and walked back into the fading afternoon. The town hushed around him. And yet, even as he walked away, the wind shifted. Because someone had noticed. Someone had seen the pin, the look in his eyes, and knew enough to care. That small, unnoticed moment, an insult delivered in front of a silent room, was not going to stay silent for long. Red didn't speak about that day. He returned home, as he always did, to the small pine-framed house at the edge of town. Inside, the walls were lined with books and a few dusty photographs, Marie smiling at a campsite, Jimmy in fatigues with his arms around 2 laughing Marines, a black and white portrait of Red himself, taken after his Silver Star citation. He removed his coat, hung it carefully, and sat by the window, staring out at the treeline where dusk now gathered. He didn't touch his dinner that night. He didn't need to. Hunger was a habit he'd long since learned to ignore. Meanwhile, the Meridian buzzed. A few patrons muttered about the incident, others shrugged it off. Most didn't even notice. Damien Voss, still riding the high of a glowing article in a regional lifestyle magazine, dismissed the confrontation as a non-event. He told his staff that the old man had come to stir up nostalgia, then warned them not to let him back in without an RSVP. "I'm not running a charity. This is a business," he told his assistant. "And no offense, but I'm not interested in scaring off customers with World War flashbacks." Red didn't hear those words, but he'd heard versions of them before. After every war, there were those who wanted to forget. That was nothing new. What hurt more was the quiet way people let it happen. The way memory was edited, then deleted. The town of Ellison Ridge had always prided itself on respect. They held annual Memorial Day parades, laid wreaths at the town square, and flew flags along Main Street from May through July. But it was performative now. The people had grown used to honoring an idea, not the men and women who lived with its reality. Red had become, in their eyes, a relic, something to admire briefly and then store away. He wasn't bitter. He'd outlived bitterness. But he did feel the slow, sinking weight of invisibility, the kind that settled over the years like dust, unnoticeable until you tried to breathe deeply. And yet, he continued to show up. He walked every morning, picked up litter when no one was watching, brought canned goods to the food pantry, and never missed his Friday visit to the VA. There, he was still recognized. Not just as a Marine, but as a mentor. Younger vets, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, would seek him out, quietly asking questions, sharing things they couldn't tell their families. Red listened, nodded, and gave what guidance he could. He never told war stories. He'd already buried most of them. One day, a young man named Theo, former Army, brought him a broken watch. "It was my dad's," he said, his voice uncertain. "He wore it in Desert Storm. You think it can be fixed?" Red examined it, turning it gently in his fingers. "Everything can be fixed," he said. But not everything was. And certainly not the Meridian. The place had become a beacon for a new crowd, wealthier tourists, remote workers with laptops and lattes, influencers snapping curated photos beneath the redesigned lighting. The staff wore matching black aprons with embroidered logos. The music was louder now. Conversations echoed, but none of them mentioned service, or sacrifice, or scars. It had been almost 6 months since Damien took down the veterans' wall. He hadn't thrown the photos away, exactly, he'd boxed them, stored them in a supply closet labeled archives. When one staffer suggested maybe putting them up in the hallway, Damien rolled his eyes. "This isn't a clubhouse. It's a brand experience." Red's photo sat on top of the pile, still in its simple black frame. The frame had a small scratch on the bottom edge, made the night Neil hung it with a bent nail. No one noticed it now. But someone had started noticing him. Lena Duarte, the off-duty Army captain who had watched Red leave in silence, hadn't been able to let it go. She wasn't from Ellison Ridge, just visiting her aunt for the week, but she had recognized the pin on Red's lapel instantly. Force Recon. Not a lot of people wore that anymore. And fewer still wore it like that, with reverence, not pride. She had watched the entire exchange, the insult, the stares, the way everyone looked away. That night, sitting at her aunt's kitchen table, Lena opened her laptop and wrote a post on a veterans forum. Then she posted it to her social media. It read, "Saw something today that cut deep. An old man walked into a bar wearing a Marine pin. He didn't say a word. The owner told him, 'This place isn't a museum.' The old man left quietly. No one stopped him. I didn't either. But I should have. Some people carry history. We just erased it." The post spread like fire in dry grass. Within hours, it was shared by former Marines, Army vets, Navy officers. By morning, it had been reposted over 10,000 times. Hashtags emerged, hashtag not just history, hashtag honor the living, hashtag Red Calder. And in a dusty office at Marine Corps Base Quantico, a graying man in uniform stared at the screen with narrowed eyes. Brigadier General Thomas Rehnquist hadn't thought about Elias Calder in years. But reading the post, he saw it clearly, Red's face, the way he led his squad through the mud in Kuwait, the time he'd pulled Rehnquist from a burning Humvee and carried him 2 miles to safety. Rehnquist picked up the phone and made a call. Meanwhile, back in Ellison Ridge, Red remained unaware. He tended to his yard, fed the squirrels, wrote letters to no one he mailed. The town moved around him. People were talking now, but not to him. Not yet. The Meridian carried on. Damien Voss noticed a dip in reservations but blamed the algorithm. He hadn't seen the post. Not yet. Not until his bar manager brought it to him, eyes wide. "You're trending," she said. Damien stared at the screen, scrolled through comments, frowned. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered. "It's just one old guy." He didn't understand. But others did. And they were already on their way. By Sunday, the post had reached over 2 million people. Red, unaware of the viral storm, spent the morning mending a broken fence panel. He worked slowly, methodically, measuring twice, cutting once. His back ached, but he didn't complain. He never did. He paused only when a pair of crows landed on the post beside him and stared with that eerie, knowing stillness birds often carried. He nodded at them, as if to say, "I see you, too." Across town, the Meridian's Sunday brunch was unusually quiet. The hostess noticed it first: empty tables that had been reserved, phone calls that went unanswered, regulars who didn't show. Then came the looks. Strangers entered not to drink, but to snap photos of the place, glance at the walls, and leave in cold silence. Damien Voss paced behind the bar, scowling at his phone, which buzzed non-stop with tags and comments. He tried to laugh it off at first, calling it a cancel culture hiccup, but the comments weren't going away. Screenshots of Lena Duarte's post appeared alongside photos of Mulligan's watch, before and after the renovation, juxtaposed with Red's quiet figure standing under the half-erased sign. The symbolism was too strong. Too painful. Too real. Veterans groups began organizing. Hashtags turned into emails. Emails turned into calls. A Facebook page titled "Justice for Red Calder" was launched and hit 10,000 members overnight. People shared stories of being dismissed, forgotten, misrepresented. Others who had once visited Mulligan's began posting grainy photos of the old wall, including one of Red himself, barely in frame, whiskey in hand, gaze low. Someone posted the old ledger Neil had kept behind the bar, a handwritten list of regulars with service years next to their names. Red, USMC, 1953 to 1994, respect, always, was circled in blue ink. Lena Duarte watched the movement grow in real time, her notifications flashing like Morse code. She hadn't intended to start anything. She just couldn't sleep with what she'd seen. Guilt had pushed her post out of her hands that night. And now the world was responding. When a national morning show picked up the story, the tone shifted. It wasn't just about a bar anymore. It was about what the bar represented, the quiet erasure of lived sacrifice, the generational drift from reverence to branding. Red Calder had become a symbol, even if he didn't know it. But General Rehnquist did. He'd made 3 calls that morning, to the Marine Corps Public Affairs Office, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and a retired master sergeant in nearby Boonville who still wore his dress blues twice a year. Rehnquist didn't speak much on the phone. He simply said, "It's time." The rest fell into place. In Ellison Ridge, Monday began like any other. The fog hadn't yet lifted when the first military vehicle rolled into town. By 8:30, 5 Humvees lined Main Street outside the Meridian, engines idling low. Onlookers gathered, drawn by instinct. People peered out from the bakery, the hardware store, the barber's window. No one had seen anything like it in years. Inside the Meridian, Damien was mid-call with his publicist when a staffer burst in. "You need to see this." "What now?" "Outside." Damien stormed out, stopping cold on the sidewalk. 24 uniformed Marines stood in formation, back straight, eyes forward. At their head was General Rehnquist, in full dress uniform, ribbons and stars gleaming beneath the morning haze. Red was not there yet. Back at his cottage, he had just finished shaving when there was a knock at the door. A young Marine sergeant stood on the porch, cap in hand, voice calm. "Mr. Calder." "Sir. We're here to escort you." Red looked at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. He changed slowly, black slacks, polished shoes, the coat with the Marine Corps pin. He added one more thing from the shelf, a small silver locket, Marie's initials engraved on the back. He tucked it into his breast pocket and nodded once. The walk back to the Meridian was brief, but the silence stretched long. As he approached, the crowd parted. The Marines snapped to attention. General Rehnquist stepped forward, saluted with crisp precision, and said simply, "Welcome back, sir." Red returned the salute, slower but steady. He looked past Rehnquist to the doorway he'd been turned away from just days before. Without speaking, he walked toward it. The crowd fell silent. Cameras rolled, but no one dared speak. Inside, he paused only once, where the veterans' wall had once hung. His eyes flicked to the space, vacant and hollow. Then, slowly, he kept walking, flanked by uniforms, through the bar he no longer recognized. Damien tried to say something, a weak protest, "You can't just walk in here like it's yours." But no one turned to him. Not even once. The town mayor arrived minutes later, breathless, adjusting her scarf. She approached Red and General Rehnquist, her voice trembling. "Mr. Calder, on behalf of Ellison Ridge, I want to offer a formal apology. This town failed to honor you properly. We are deeply sorry." Red looked at her, kind but distant. "Don't be sorry for me. Be better to the next one." Those were his only words that day. By noon, the story had reached every major outlet. Photos of the moment, Red's weathered hand returning Rehnquist's salute, the Marines' information, the stunned look on Damien's face, circulated with captions like, "Honor returns," and, "One step forward." But Red didn't linger. He left quietly, returning home the way he came. That night, he sat by the window again, listening to the soft tick of the repaired watch Theo had left with him the week before. He'd fixed it, of course. He always did. And as the stars pressed through the dark, Red looked out at the tree-line, unblinking. Somewhere out there, he knew, another young soldier would one day walk the same road. And maybe, just maybe, the world would meet them with better eyes. Lena Duarte returned to the Meridian one last time that evening. She didn't stay for a drink. She walked to the spot where Red had once sat, touched the wall with her fingertips, and whispered, "I saw you." That was all. Sometimes, the most powerful witness is the one who says nothing, but never forgets. The morning after Red's return to the Meridian, Ellison Ridge woke to something it hadn't felt in years: purpose. It was subtle at first. An older couple left flowers on the doorstep of the bar. A teenage boy in an oversized Army ROTC sweatshirt scrubbed graffiti off the Veterans Memorial downtown. The town's diner, once slow on weekdays, now bustled with quiet conversation, nearly every booth occupied by someone flipping through printouts of the now famous photo, Red and Rehnquist saluting beneath the Meridian's logo. But Red stayed home. He didn't want the attention, hadn't asked for it. When reporters knocked on his door, he ignored them. When strangers dropped off thank you cards, he read them, then placed them unopened in a shoebox Marie had once used for recipes. And when the mayor offered him a key to the city, he declined politely but firmly. "That key won't open anything I need," he said. Still, momentum built. Veterans from across the country began arriving, some quietly, some with their families. They came not for spectacle, but to stand on the same sidewalk Red had been turned away from. Some left dog tags at the base of the building. Others stood in silence, saluting a man most had never met but instantly recognized. Not as a celebrity, but as a brother. Inside the Meridian, the staff grew uneasy. Damien had gone dark on social media. He refused all interviews, fired his PR team, and locked himself in his office for hours at a time. Bookings dropped by nearly 70% in 1 week. Online reviews tanked, most reading simply, "We don't forget." Then came the call from the governor's office. An official inquiry had been opened into the use of public grants Damien had received during the renovation. Word spread fast, damning headlines, screenshots of financial inconsistencies, quotes from former employees. It was no longer about aesthetics or branding. Now, it was about ethics. By the end of the week, Damien stepped down as proprietor. The Meridian closed its doors with a terse press release that cited creative restructuring. But the town had already moved on. There was a bigger question at hand: what now? The answer came from an unlikely place. It started with Theo, the young veteran Red had helped. Theo had stayed quiet throughout the whirlwind, but he'd watched everything, listened, read, understood. And one night, sitting in the back row of a town council meeting, he stood up and said, "What if we don't just apologize? What if we fix it, for real?" His idea was simple. Turn the Meridian into something useful. Not another bar. Not another plaque on the wall. But a space where veterans could actually find help, mental health services, job training, housing support. A place built from respect, not decoration. The room went quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then everyone. The mayor called Red the next day. She explained the idea, asked for his blessing. "I'm not the one who needs convincing," Red said. "You do." She nodded, even though he couldn't see it over the phone. "Then we'll earn it." The next few weeks became a whirlwind of planning. Local businesses donated materials. State representatives pledged funding. Veterans organizations lent architects, planners, therapists. Even high school students volunteered to clean out the bar's interior, removing Damien's modernist decor with satisfying swings of hammers and crowbars. And at the center of it all, without speaking at any ribbon cuttings or giving any speeches, was Red. He came by most mornings to check progress. He'd nod to volunteers, sometimes place a hand on a younger vet's shoulder. Once, he stayed late sanding down a splintered door frame until the grain ran smooth beneath his fingers. People didn't crowd him. They worked beside him. That was all he ever wanted. The new facility was named unanimously, the Calder Center for Veteran Integration. Its mission was carved into a marble slab by the front door. To honor service not with words, but with action. On opening day, the town gathered. No press, by Red's request. Just neighbors, friends, Marines, soldiers, airmen, and sailors in every shade of uniform. Some came with children, others with walkers. A few just stood alone, their expressions unreadable. Theo was the first to speak. "This place is for us, all of us. And it wouldn't exist without one man who showed us what quiet strength looks like." He turned to Red, standing near the back. "You didn't ask for this. But you earned it." Applause erupted, not raucous but reverent. Red nodded once. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. The building itself had transformed. The old bar had been split into counseling rooms, a common space with books and coffee, a job board in the corner, a wall where people could post photos of loved ones who served. But one section remained untouched. Just beyond the entryway, framed in soft lighting, hung a new veteran's wall. At its center was Red's portrait, the one once boxed away, now reprinted and reframed. Below it were three simple words. Semper Fidelis, Red. As months passed, the Calder Center became more than a building, it became a living thing. Veterans stopped in weekly. Families sought guidance. Schoolchildren came to interview residents for history projects. Therapists offered free group sessions, and on weekends, the common room held poetry readings, writing workshops, and moments of hard-won laughter. But it was what happened quietly that mattered most. A man named Lucas, Navy, discharged after a failed suicide attempt, found a job through the center's employment board and came back weekly to mentor younger vets. A woman named Carla, Air Force, single mother of 2, got housing assistance and eventually became the center's full-time coordinator. Even Damien Voss, now out of the spotlight and nursing his own wounds, sent a letter. Red didn't read it, but he placed it beneath a stack marked, "One day." Red never claimed credit. But his presence remained. He'd walk the halls with slow steps, pausing to ask simple things. "You sleep okay? You eat this morning? You talk to your folks yet?" Simple things that meant everything. And on Veterans Day, 3 months after the Calder Center opened, Red stood by the window as a small parade passed by. Not a grand affair, just kids waving flags, a brass band playing off-key, a few proud salutes from sidewalk to street. Red watched. Then saluted back. Not for himself, but for those who couldn't. And that was enough. 3 years passed, quietly, gracefully, as if time finally recognized that Red Calder had earned a slower pace. Seasons turned in Ellison Ridge, and with each cycle, the Calder Center grew stronger. It didn't expand in size, it expanded in meaning. What began as a local project had become a national template. Cities across the country reached out to replicate the model. Veterans wrote in daily, some asking for help, others offering it. A senator even quoted the center's founding statement during a televised hearing on veteran affairs. The words, "To honor service not with words, but with action," were etched into legislative memory now, but for the people of Ellison Ridge, they were just how things were done. Red was still there, of course. Or at least, he had been. Until he couldn't be. His steps had grown slower, his shoulders narrower. He stopped coming every day, then every week. But even in absence, his presence lingered. A coat rack by the front door still held his old Marine-issued jacket. His carved wooden cane leaned beside it. And on his favorite chair in the common area, a simple armchair with plaid upholstery, someone had placed a small embroidered pillow that read, "Reserved for Red." He spent his last months in the hospice wing of the very center he'd inspired. The room was modest, a bed, a window, and a wall covered in quiet tokens, photos of Marie, his brother Jimmy, Theo's watch, and a folded flag beneath glass. The staff tried not to hover, though they came in pairs just to sit nearby. Some read to him. Others simply stayed in silence. He liked that best. On good days, Red would tell stories. Not war stories, those stayed buried, but stories about fly fishing with his brother, fixing up his first car, the night Marie beat him at poker and took his last $20. "Best loss of my life," he'd say with a crooked smile. When the end came, it was gentle. The nurse on duty, a former Navy medic named Sloan, held his hand through the final breath. The room was still. There were no machines beeping, no dramatic gasps. Just a slow exhale, and then nothing. Word spread fast. No announcement was needed. No bulletin, no press release. By mid-morning, the entire Calder Center had fallen into respectful hush. The flag outside was lowered to half-mast. Visitors and staff gathered in the courtyard, some holding small flags, others simply folding their hands. A child placed a single red rose on the front step. The memorial was scheduled for the next day. Red had made it clear, no spectacle, no speeches, no cameras. Just his brothers and sisters, if they chose to come. And they did. By sunrise, dozens of veterans arrived. They wore dress uniforms, camouflage, denim, or whatever they had. It didn't matter. They lined the street leading to the Calder Center, boots echoing on the pavement as they marched in silent procession. No drumline. No commands. Just footsteps, measured, solemn, enduring. At the center of it all was Red's casket, draped in the American flag. 6 veterans, 2 Marines, 2 Army, 1 Navy, 1 Air Force, carried it through the gates. Not assigned by rank or protocol, but by who knew him best. Theo was among them, tears glinting behind his glasses. So was Lena Duarte, who had traveled from Fort Bragg in full dress blues, her chest a tapestry of commendations, her heart tight behind her ribs. The service was brief. A chaplain read a passage Red had once marked in a book of poetry. To be forgotten is death twice. To be remembered with love is eternity. Then came the final salute. Hundreds of hands rose in unison. And then, silence. Number 21 gun salute. No orchestral lament. Just silence. And somehow, it was more powerful than sound. After the casket was taken to the cemetery, veterans remained at the center. Some shared stories over coffee. Others simply wandered the halls, pausing at Red's photo. A new plaque had been placed beneath it that morning. It read, Elias, Red, Calder. 1936 to 2028. Marine. Brother. Builder of quiet revolutions. In the weeks that followed, the Calder Center became even more than it had been. Theo stepped into a leadership role, aided by Carla and Lena, who took a temporary leave from active duty to help restructure its expanding programs. A new wing was proposed and approved within a month, dedicated entirely to transitional housing. It would be called Jimmy's Hall, named for Red's brother, as Red had requested in a note found in his desk. Letters continued to arrive. One came from the White House. Another from the Department of Defense. But the one that meant the most was handwritten, signed by 4 young veterans who had never met Red, but whose lives had been changed by the center. It read, We never got to shake your hand. But you held ours from a distance. Thank you. Every Veterans Day that followed, the town of Ellison Ridge held its own procession, not grand, but faithful. Local children carried flags. Residents stood quietly along the sidewalks. At the front walked the oldest veterans, their steps slow but firm. And always, someone carried Red's coat, buttoned, clean, and worn with pride. On the 3rd anniversary of his passing, the center unveiled a sculpture in the courtyard. It was simple, a bench with 2 boots resting beneath it, a marine cover placed beside. On the back was etched a phrase that had become a kind of town credo. Honor is not nostalgia. It's duty, carried forward. And so it was. Young soldiers now passed through Ellison Ridge not as strangers, but as kin. The coffee was always hot. The doors were always open. And on one wall, untouched, a small wooden sign hung above Red's chair. It read simply, Still here. He never left.